I remember when we were just young, freshly married. My wife and I, we were not making a lot of money and just had a lot of dreams, a lot of hopes, and really just enjoying being married, enjoyed just life with God. And somewhere along the way, though, a dream got stuck into our heart where we're like, we really want to buy a house for our future, for our home, for our future family. But back then, both of us were like just barely making entry-level amount of money. And I wasn't very aware of finances, and I had a bad credit from before, and I was thinking to myself, this is impossible. How am I going to buy a house? And if the house that we're going to buy, it's going to be like really, really nasty. But somehow that desire, that dream didn't go away, so we started looking around and started getting a sense of the market. And these figures were coming up, but we weren't thinking about the money as much. We're just like, wow, this is a beautiful home. This is a beautiful home. Oh, we'd love to have a home like this. Love to have our kids in this home like this. But we were just either priced out or the homes were just kind of nasty. And then we just ran into this one new development, and we came across the house, and something was different. This felt like home. And what was even better was when we actually did the math, when we actually finally went through the process, it was gettable. And we just thinking to ourselves, wow, this dream that we have as a young couple to actually have a home of our own, it was, all we could see was, wow, we're so thankful. And we know, I look back and I realized this was all God that made it possible. And then reality struck. We actually sat down and like in my head, I'm in the clouds like, oh, wow, we can buy a house. And then have you ever been in a place where you're past a handful of papers and like you just have to keep signing and signing and signing, and I'm like, what's this? My hand started cramping, and actually after signing the whole pile, I was like, it dawned upon me, this is really costly. I've just signed away 30 years of my life. 30 years. I was barely over 30 years old. It's like my whole life ahead of me is going to be paying for this house. The fine print in that contract kind of really hit me. And I realized, wow, this is big. I'm an adult now. This is really, really big. I don't know if you've had moments like that where what you're getting is now like the benefits, the joy of what you experience and what you're getting. It's coming real because you recognize that there is a hefty cost that's attached to it. Often, sometimes when we just see the benefits, just see how the dream is coming there, just see the good stuff that's coming, we don't pay attention that there is another aspect of it. This is actually true, not the contract part, but both the incredible benefit, the joy, what we receive when we experience God, when we follow Him, even the little steps, that there is a return on our investment. There's a return of God vindicating and saying, I'm with you. There's a consequence, a great consequence in even our daily lives when we begin to follow Jesus. But often the church and pastors have not been as strong and as transparent about there is a cost. Partly because we don't like to talk about that part. We don't like to be honest with the fact that, discipleship, as you walk and follow with Jesus, when you're real with Jesus, there's a cost involved. There are decisions that are going to have to be made. And the disciples themselves experience this. They get caught up in the ride of following Jesus. I don't know, we have this thing called like a viral movement where things just kind of go crazy out of nowhere and everybody joins and it's all hyped up and it's so cool. You're on social media and you're Facebooking and you're Instagramming everything of that. I'm in the center. I'm in the eye of the storm of this incredible viral movement. That's the dream of a lot of us. That's what the disciples experienced. They were handpicked by Jesus, who is healing people left and right. He's declaring this incredible kingdom that's come. And at that point in time, this was the most important thing that they've ever experienced. They were in the center of all of this. And can you imagine what they were expecting? That as Jesus coming into Jerusalem, they're expecting they're going to have all the accoutrements, all the benefits that they have maybe even experienced some suffering for, some investment. They left everything to follow him with the expectation that when he comes into power and authority, all of that is going to be his and theirs too. to their shock, which is we're going to follow through and track in this passage today, Jesus says something that goes in the very opposite direction, that they needed to pay attention to and that we do as well. We're in a whole series called Follow, because this is really what is at the core of what it means to have a relationship with God. It's, yes, we get to experience His forgiveness. We get to experience His goodness and His presence. But if we don't pay attention to the calls to follow Him in our daily lives, in the choices that we make, in our lifestyles, in our hearts, in our relationships, we really don't get to know who He is. We don't get to see the full expression of experiencing Him and growing in Him. That following is the clearest expression of what it means to be a Christian, a Christ follower. We are in session 5, or the 5th step of this 8-step journey that we're doing in our grace groups. And today we're going to talk about, in the language of Andy Stanley, the fine print. The fine print, because it's there. There is this dichotomy that's described. So let me go back real quick. Where Jesus is approaching His disciples. And they have been following Him. They have been just caught up in the ride. And as they get to this place, right before this verse where Jesus begins to teach them something different, He asks them this simple question. Who do the people say that I am? And some of the people are like, oh, you're like John the Baptist, this powerful prophet who is gaining all the attention of the people of God. Others like, you're like Elijah, this great figure who said they would come again, and right before God does this really big thing. It was Peter who actually boldly says, no. You are the Christ. You are the Messiah, the one God has anointed and we've been waiting for. The one who's going to fix all of problems, the one who is going to bring in all of God's plans. It is a huge statement. For us, we can just kind of say, oh, sure, can't you tell? Who does all this stuff? But for Peter, even Jesus says it, Peter, you didn't figure this out by yourself. God revealed this to you. It's a big moment. It's a great moment. And you feel like, oh, finally, Jesus is going to be on the move. He's going to do His Messiah work. But the incredible part is, Jesus takes a quick turn because He recognizes something in the expectations of His own disciples, that they need to see that there is not only a cost, but this is not going to look what they expected it to be. It's not all easy. It's not all good. Verse 31, He then began to teach them. Jesus began to teach them that the Son of God Himself, Son of Man, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, that He must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this. And Peter took Him aside and began to rebuke Him. Now, when we see this passage, it's kind of like, who does Peter think he is? What a jerk. What a snob. He thinks he's going to tell Jesus that Jesus is wrong. Okay? And some kids do that, by the way. Some kids, they sit there and they tell their dads and their moms, you don't know what you're doing. I'm going to do it myself. It's just what it looks like. But if we pay attention here, Peter actually is not because he is sinful and he's just so selfish and so unteachable. There's something going on in his mind. He actually is concerned. Okay? This is very real. He is concerned for Jesus, and he's concerned for himself. He's concerned for the people who's listening. Who's going to want to follow a Messiah whose job is to save you, but instead says, I'm going to suffer, I'm going to get rejected, and I'm going to get killed? And who cares about the rise again? Suffer, rejected, killed. Who wants to follow one like that? Because if you follow one like that, what happens to you? The whole movement is threatened. And so Peter, out of concern, care for Jesus, care for the movement, he actually catches Jesus and he begins to rebuke him. And Jesus, his response is something that's very dramatic. We don't really see this. Except here. He catches something in Peter's assumptions. He catches something in Peter that out of love he has to address. But it's a tough love. He says, when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan. Okay. You never want to hear this. You never want to hear this from somebody sitting next to your spouse or your friend in Christ or your family, your church member, okay? Can you imagine you're in a small group and you say something and your small group leader says, "Get behind me, Satan." You don't want to hear this. You don't want to hear this from Jesus, okay? Trust me, this is not something you want to hear from Jesus. I think Peter was like, "What?" And a lot of us think that, Peter was possessed. He must have something must have been planted in his heart and in mind that's straight from Satan. This is horrible. But look at Jesus' response. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. I thought he said, "Get behind me, Satan," but he has human concerns. What is he saying? Peter came at Jesus with human concerns, thinking the way that we normally do, with a certain cost-benefit analysis, with a certain understanding of, I put my investment here, I follow here, I expect certain returns. I don't expect to suffer, to be rejected, and to die like you. I don't care about the raised against stuff. I don't want to go through that. But interestingly enough, that was the route by which Satan was working in Peter, in his disciples, and I think that's the reason why Jesus responds so strongly. That is what Jesus was being tempted by Satan himself. Whether it's in the garden, realizing that he doesn't have to go through this difficulty, that he doesn't have to follow God. That's what he's being tempted to say. And in response both to Peter, but also as a positioning himself, he says something interesting. I make a clear stand here in my own life and also make a stand for the disciples. Okay? That there is a conflict of interest between the concerns of God and even these human concerns. I'm going to kind of follow through a little here. Okay? That there's a conflict of interest when you're trying to follow Jesus and you're trying to follow God, and when you have the human concerns, even coming to God, expecting benefits, expecting him to love you, take care of you, heal you, and so on and so forth, and where you're just a consumer. This is Andy Sandy's language. That the conflict of interest here is Peter needs to be challenged. Will you follow me at cost? Or will you see this as a consumer transaction? And then Jesus looks at the crowd. He's already spoke to Peter and all the disciples, and then to the whole crowd. And this is for all of us. And said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." Okay, that's a tough thing. You can't follow him, really, unless you deny yourself and take up your cross. What does it mean to take up your cross? What does it mean to deny yourself? And growing up, denying yourself meant you give up something that's pleasurable, something that's fun, something that's nice. You give up something that maybe you would like to be able to do, but you do for God. For example, you guys are here, you're giving up. I know outside is not very beautiful right now. It's kind of, it's fun to be inside with people. But what if it was a beautiful day and you've given up your Sunday in this busy New York life, right? This precious day to spend with God and to try to follow, right? We would give up a lot as a family just because my father was choir director. He had church practices. We would there be early all day at church and all night, it felt like at times. We would give up a lot. It felt like that. Denying ourselves meant you have to feel kind of miserable, okay? And then if you you show yourself to be so religious and so spiritual that you're miserable, then that means you're a good Christian. Yeah. In fact, when I told my parents, God was calling me to go into ministry, that was the shock and the pain of their life. They're like, "We denied ourselves this whole time, and God's asking you to go into ministry." And I finally figured out, after a long time, why don't you want me to go into ministry? And it's like, "You're going to suffer. You're going to suffer." It's true. Life. They saw the pastors really suffer, and pastoral life is like all Christian life. There's suffering involved. "We don't want you to suffer. We did all this so you didn't have to suffer. So you can become a doctor, get self-esteem, you get all this, have a nice house, so on and so forth. We don't want you to suffer." And I realized that, in fact, they had no idea of a kind of denying yourself that actually is not focused on the suffering, but it's focused on Jesus. I looked at them and I'm okay. I'm not doing it to feel religious. I'm doing it because out of joy. It was a strange, and God allowed me to have this moment of, and this season of, I'm ready just to follow him wherever, because denying myself, I learned this at that moment, is not about taking away from yourself. It's actually, as Andy Stanley says, it says, yes, you're saying no to you, not just because it's good to say no to you and to make yourself feel low. You're saying no to you in order to say yes to Jesus. It's realizing that sometimes your own agenda, your own desires, and even the path that you would choose for yourself, it actually comes into a conflict of interest with what it means to follow Jesus. And when that happens, guess what? We have to do a different cost, benefit analysis. That following Jesus is that much more worth it. And so Jesus makes this grand statement. If anyone wants to be my disciples, they have to take up their cross. They have to deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Yeah. And he just doesn't say that and then stop. He gives reasons. He helps us understand what are the stakes? What happens when you follow him? What are the reasons? In fact, in the original language, there are four F-O-Rs, fours. 4 reasons, 4 times this word for in the original language comes up. It's only translated once in the NIV. But you see here, it starts off in verse 35. For, in other words, because, pay attention to this, whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Okay, you're thinking, if I try to avoid this path, following Jesus means you have to give up something, following Jesus means it's tough, and so on and so forth. If I just do it the way that it's easy, do it the way that I want to, follow when I want to when it's easy, and so on and so forth, and get all the benefits, and so on and so forth. But whoever wants to save their life and does it that way, they'll end up losing it. But whoever loses their life for Jesus, for me and the gospel, they will save it. It is this flipped around understanding. Yeah. You're not losing something, you're gaining something. Denying yourself means you're saying yes to Jesus. It means actually you're gaining more of him. You're gaining more experience of him. You're gaining the depths of knowing what God is like and the vindication that comes when you follow him. Yeah. Every time we come to this conflict of interest, where our worldly concerns, our human concerns even, right, come into conflict of interest, God is saying, deny yourself here. Choose him this way. Follow him this way. And we don't. We think we're saving our life, but actually it's taking something away from us. It's a flipping it around. It's not just a word play. It's the reality that following Jesus adds something powerful. It actually saves our very souls. What good is it? This is another 4, by the way. Okay, starting from verse 36. For what good is it for someone to gain the whole world? You can, in fact, gain what it feels like the whole world. You can get your dreams. You can get that job. You can get that house. You can get that spouse. You can hunt after these things. And what if you got it all? Number 1, you can't keep it. But number 2, in getting it and refusing to follow Jesus along the way, guess what? Here's what he's saying. You could forfeit your soul. That's a big thing. You can forfeit your soul. For what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? He's talking about the value of your soul. Here's our difficulty. Most of us don't value our souls very much. We can value money, right? We can value experience. We can value, something tangible, but valuing our souls is a little tough, right? In fact, can you imagine if somebody put their soul on sale, right? I'm not talking about the Kia soul, right? I'm talking about your soul, yeah? Yeah? What's the price of your soul? People have tried it, okay, on eBay. Okay. In fact, this woman named Lori N., we don't know her last name, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, she basically said, I'm selling a authentic certificate of a slightly used soul. And she put the first bid for $2,000. Okay, that's her value of herself. My soul is worth $2,000, right? eBay actually really quickly came and they squashed it. But other people have tried. They've posted, I'm going to sell my soul. One guy actually, apart from eBay, this is from Wired Magazine actually, he started a bidding war and said, come on guys, I'm selling my soul. A New York real estate guy, New Yorker, right, purchased the soul for about $1,400. Yeah. So he is in legal, he holds this person's soul. isn't that sad? Your soul is worth $1,400. Yeah. Yeah. What is the price tag of your soul? What is the price tag of your soul? Think about it. When we are deciding whether we're going to follow Jesus, we're prompted and we know this is what it means to follow Jesus in this, and we just said we're so caught up with human concerns that we actually don't think that God's concerns, God's way of doing things is actually valuable. What is it saying? We have totally disregarded the value of our soul. Yeah. In the end, the final analysis, what we think is the fine print. Wow, it's so costly. I have to give up something. Actually, is we have given up the most valuable thing there is. Who we are and our final destiny. They're intertwined. There is a high price tag of refusing to follow Jesus when that conflict of interest comes. There's a high price tag. Now, I didn't like the language of contract because a relationship with God is not contract. Okay? And it's not like if I follow you, I get eternity in heaven. Okay? You do, but that's not the contract. Or if I don't follow you, I go to hell. That's not the contract. The way I want to understand this is something happens when you recognize the full and the real cost-benefit analysis here. That following Jesus results in something in you. Results in such a way that by the time you follow Jesus, you've become like him, and you become so identified with him, you have a home with him. Every step of time where you choose not to follow him, you go in the opposite direction because of human concerns even, guess what? You've moved apart from him. You don't understand him. You are not identified with him. And going down that path, you're a stranger to him. Yeah. Following Jesus and doing it because you love him, do it because you do this, you deny yourself willingly, is kind of like the pathway of becoming someone who knows how to love. I like this way. This understanding makes a lot more sense to me. In fact, it's not a contract. It's actually following in the way Jesus loves. Because when he loves and when he leads us to love, self-denial, denying of your own rights willingly is deeply involved. Okay? You cannot love somebody if actually you'll only love them if it doesn't take anything away from you. Yeah? Try that in the marriage. Okay, I will love you as long as it costs me nothing. Okay? You know how poor a marriage that is? Try that doing as a parent. Okay? In fact, something amazing happens to parents. You know, a mom actually talked about her transformation of understanding what it means to deny yourself in order to follow Jesus by her experience of having a child. Because when you have a child, you end up willingly denying yourself of a lot of stuff. I denied myself of hundreds, if not thousands, hours of sleep. Okay? I love to sleep in. I haven't slept in since my firstborn. And then I got old, and you hit 40, and you don't sleep anymore. It's like, oh, I missed my window. You know, I missed my window of really good sleep. Yeah, but I don't think they're saying, oh man, my child, you stole my sleep. How dare you? I hate you. You know, I did it willingly. You know, my baby's crying. Okay, a little grudgingly. Like, oh, she's up again. A little grudgingly, but I did it willingly, right? I denied myself of like clean clothes. Okay, for about 2 years, I had drool over this shoulder. They only went to my left shoulder. I denied myself activity. I didn't do anything for myself. I didn't even exercise because all of your energy was spent on these children. I denied myself of a clean house. And so on and so forth. Mothers deny themselves, their very body, they have to deny themselves. You think about it. But it's not like, okay, I'm doing this so that I'm earning something. No. It's a willingness. What happens to a person who keeps on that road? They become someone who actually knows how to love. Isn't that interesting? One way to understand self-denial, one way to understand love is you are willingly giving up your rights. You're giving up your rights. Nobody's putting a gun to your head, you must, you have to, or threaten you. You're giving up your rights. You know, when I do premarital counseling, I walk people through Ephesians chapter 5 and 6. And in that passage, it looks like it's about submitting and leadership, but actually it's about giving up your rights. Women are asked to give up your rights, to do it the way you want to do it in order to follow, because you're following Jesus. Isn't that interesting? You get to do this self-denying, taking up your cross, and following Jesus in your marriage. Men are called to give up their rights for their own security, to let their bodies be given up for the sake of not just their wives, but for the sake of Christ. Isn't this a beautiful expression of what love is? Spend 10 years, 20 years giving up of yourself, giving up your rights. You become a beautiful person. You become one who knows what Christ's heart looks like because you're living it. Spend 10 years, 20 years, and a conflict of interest comes and you say, no, this is mine. I get to do what I want to do. Look what kind of person you become, much less the collateral damage around you. Can you imagine a parent who is so caught up with their own rights that in fact they can't even give up their own time, their own funds, their own energy for their child? I ran across this article this week, and I don't know all the details, but it hit me. They found this child on the swings, and the forensics people, when they came in, they found this child was left there for weeks because maggots were in the child. Somehow the parents left the child in the swing and never went to retrieve him in the backyard. And the child was there for weeks. And you're thinking to yourself, what kind of parent could do that? What kind of monster can be so clueless of somebody else, their own child, that they can't even deny themselves the care to take care of them? What kind of monsters do we become when actually we take the path of, in the name of human concerns, I must have this, I want this, that actually we have no idea that God and Jesus is calling us to follow him, that our very souls become saved. It is a process. Every step when that conflict of interest comes and you choose to deny yourself, you choose to love somebody, not against your will or grudgingly or because you're being peer pressured or forced or you're being nagged to death, but instead because you're doing it willingly. Loving your spouse, you're doing it because you love Christ. Loving your children, loving your friends, loving your church members, you're loving your stranger because you love Christ. You're giving up your rights to pursue him. It doesn't take something from you. It gives you Christ. And in the end, when all is said and done, that last verse about when you stand before Jesus, and this is verse 30. I'm gonna fast forward here. In the end, when it talks about, okay, if anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, that's a generation that is so caught up in themselves and their own human concerns, they don't know the concerns of God, they will not follow when the conflict of interest comes. If anyone's ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory with the holy angels. What does that mean? He's saying, we will have shown ourselves to be so different from him, we are unrecognizable. You know that story of someone saying, you can say, Lord, 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 but if you don't obey his will, if you don't follow him, okay, you're going to be knocking on the door, Lord, Lord, let me in. He'll be like, I don't know you. I don't recognize you. There's nothing of me in you. This is not your home, right? Versus somebody who's been following him. And there's something of Jesus in that person. I know you. You know how to love. You've been practicing and learning. I am in you. Following him identifies with him. Not just a ticket to get into heaven. It changes us. Refusing to forfeits our very soul. It's not easy to follow. In fact, it feels like death. It's tough. In our culture, giving up our rights is not a beautiful thing. It's like, no, we got to get up, stand up, you know. I can do the Bob Marley, get up for your rights, right? We love that, like, no, we've got to fight for them. That's how our country came into being. This is a mantra for us. Don't let anybody squash you. You know, somebody's a racist and call them out. Somebody oppresses you. No, you have rights, you have rights, you have rights. And that's true, but actually, isn't it interesting that in Christ, it goes the exact opposite direction. There are, yes, you have to fight for other people's rights. You have to stand up for social justice and so on and so forth. But for a Christian, when it comes to following Jesus, it's so countercultural in this. Oswald Chambers put it this way: the only right a Christian has is the right to give up his or her rights or not. You know what that means? You have this ability, you have this right that God gives you to say, I will deny myself. I will give up my rights. I will love or I won't. I will trust you and I'll follow you. I'll love you, Jesus, or I won't. Yeah. And when we focus our attention there, we say no to ourselves and our human concerns because we're saying yes to Jesus. That's when we actually come to really know Christ, become like Christ. Okay? This is Francis Chan. Francis Chan says, the world says, love yourself. Grab all you can, follow your heart. Do you hear this every day? Grab all you can, love yourself, follow your heart. Jesus says, deny yourself. Grab your cross and follow me. It's not an easy thing because the cross isn't sometimes what we think it is. Okay? Sometimes you're suffering in your relationship, your spouse doesn't understand you, they're torturing you, and you're like, this is my cross. Don't ever call your spouse a cross. Bad idea. Bad idea. And it's not true. Okay? But sometimes, God's going to ask you to give up your rights for a certain experience. Give up your rights for a certain relationship. Give up your rights. Give up your rights for a certain satisfaction. That's a tough thing. Yeah. There's passages in the scripture. You know why the Catholic Church doesn't allow their priests to get married? Because of a specific passage about there will be special servants who are giving up their very rights to have a normal marriage relationship. Yeah. It's not because you have to, like the Catholic Church forces you now. It's they're willing to for the sake of the gospel and the kingdom. There's beautiful expressions of this. And sometimes we have to, your experience of giving up your rights and taking up the cross is not somebody else's. Sometimes your experience of giving up your rights looks different. In fact, Peter, in the book of John, experiences this. He was asked to go down a route and give up his rights in a way that we will, honestly, most of us never were. I can almost guarantee you, nobody in this room is going to be crucified, right? None of us is going to have to go through what Peter did or the disciples did, okay? But look at the way Jesus actually challenges him. Very truly I tell you, this is Jesus talking to Peter at the end of the book of John. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you were old, you will stretch out your hands, someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this is to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said, follow me. What is he saying? When you were younger, self-denying, loving God and loving others wasn't that important to you. You did what you wanted to do. You went where you wanted to go. But your call is actually, when you get older, and this is Peter's story, you're going to be led to a place where someone's going to stretch your hands out and lead you where you do not want to go. Follow me. Right after this, Peter says, what about that guy? If I'm going down, that guy goes down, right? What about that guy? And Jesus has to say, what's it to you? He might have a different cross. He might have a different path. We don't have Peter's path. But we're going to have things in our life where God's going to say, will you trust me here? When the conflict of interest comes, will you give up your right? Watch what I do with it. Watch out. Be careful if you just make the cost-benefit analysis amongst worldly concerns. Okay. I'm almost finished here. I'm going to give you one last quote. Growing up, was aware of the story of Jim Elliot, and many of us have forgotten his story. He is one of 6, was it 5 or 6, missionaries who went down to Brazil, and they were reaching out to this community, unreached peoples, the Alca Indians. They were a cannibalistic group, and they felt so called to to go in there and express the love of God and to share the gospel with them. And the long story told, what ends up happening is a bunch of them, including Jim Elliot, at a young age, they gave up their rights to their very own life. They were slaughtered. The beautiful story is that their wives, instead of bringing on destruction on this community, they themselves, the wives came, and that community was reached. They became Christ followers by the grace of God. But he has this quote in his journal as a young man, and he says, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." What is he saying? I think he's quoting what Jesus was saying. I know the full cost-benefit analysis. I am not an idiot. I cannot keep all these things. I could spend my whole life trying to make a life for myself. I will only lose it. But I will forfeit my very soul. But if I follow Jesus, even to the point of giving up my own life. Now, we're not all called to do that. But if I learn to love like this, even in my daily life, in my primary relationships, and begin to follow him in this way, denying my rights, denying myself, guess what? I will gain something that I will never, ever lose. I want you to bow your heads with me.